Hi everyone, welcome and thank you for joining us today. We have a great session lined up for you. I'm Emma Carney, Senior Director of Client Development at SAP Concur, and I'll be your host for this session. I'm excited to introduce our guest speaker, Shadé Zahrai. Chances are, if you've tuned into our webinars in the past, you'll be familiar with Shadé. We're delighted to have her return to share her insights on how to successfully navigate personal and business growth and change. Shadé will be taking us through the psychology of grit and why it's so essential when faced with challenges. An award-winning leadership strategist, Harvard-trained coach, and member of the esteemed Forbes Coaches Council, Shadé is a specialist in building a success mindset for business professionals and enhancing people-centric cultures. A former commercial lawyer with a background in psychology and consulting, Shadé is recognized for her ability to translate neuroscience and psychology research into practical, actionable strategies to accelerate success. Shadé consults, trains, and coaches leaders and teams from startups to Fortune 500s, enhancing change readiness for transformation. If, like me, you follow Shadé on Instagram or LinkedIn, you'll know she's a world-class presenter and shares a wealth of amazing tips to help excel in life, career, and business. If the past couple of years has taught us anything, it's that mindset is everything. With that, I'll hand you over to Shadé. Welcome, Shadé.
Thank you so much, Emma. It's so wonderful to be back with SAP Concur. I love these sessions and I'm so excited to dive into this particular one. So let's move right along. What do you think tops aptitude and raw talent as the biggest predictor of achievement? What do you think it is? It's actually your ability to persist, to work hard and to overcome obstacles, and it's otherwise known as grit, which is what we're here to discuss. Now, grit is a personality trait characterized by having passion and perseverance, not for short-term, but for long-term goals. And when we look at all the research on grit, it demonstrates how this quality leads to enhanced performance, retention, and even well-being. Now, here is what we know about grit. Not everyone has it, but the good news is it can be developed. So this is exactly what we're exploring during our time together. Essential science-based principles to bounce forward with grit, to increase your mental toughness so that you can navigate anything that comes your way and transform bad breaks to breakthroughs. Now, grit isn't talent. Grit isn't luck. Grit isn't how intensely for the moment you want something. These are often misconceptions. Angela Duckworth, the psychologist and researcher who first researched this construct, she said that grit is passion and sustained persistence applied towards long-term achievement. And this is the important part, with no particular concern for rewards or recognition along the way. So it's not what you demonstrate because there's a bonus at the end or some industry award. It's actually internally driven. It's a desire to persist because of passion. You're passionate about the process, the learning, the experience. Grit is especially important in the world that we're living in. There are so many challenges and uncertainties that people are facing. The last few years have seen significant changes to the global economy, society, and the way that we live and work. Many people that we come across, and when we look to the research, this is also confirmed, they're still struggling with the uncertainties. And then, of course, we have the uncertainties posed by AI, which are, of course, exciting opportunities, but also quite scary for many in terms of what it might mean for their roles and the future. So the quality of grit becomes this critical factor in overcoming obstacles and adapting to change in this highly digital world that we're living in. And by developing your grit, you'll be able to persist through difficult times, maintain your focus and determination, and keep moving forward even when faced with setbacks and obstacles, which, as we know, are inevitable. This quality is what will allow you to stay resilient in the face of uncertainty and to maintain hope and optimism for the future. You'll be really well positioned to succeed in the current landscape and well into the future. But before we go any further, we need to acknowledge right up front that there is a blaring challenge with grit and with persisting. It's an obvious risk. And the risk is that on our journey, we often face this, the risk of failure. Whenever we're engaging in a project, an initiative, a new change program, there's no way of knowing whether it's going to succeed. So there is always a risk of failure. But the reality is very simple. Those who take risks are more successful. It's a critical business skill. When there is a chance that something may not work out, which is the case whenever you're trying anything new, it keeps many people stuck. It keeps them stagnant. It keeps them paralyzed. It prevents them from putting their hands up for new opportunities, from trying new things, from taking on new roles, experimenting and stepping outside of their comfort zone. It holds them back professionally. They're less likely to suggest new ideas or innovate. They're less creative. And this is a huge shame not only for them and their own development, but also for the team and the organizations. More people than you realize are crippled by a fear of failure. And this is a problem if you actually want to develop your grit. Now, there's something really interesting when it comes to fear of failure. One of the primary reasons why many of us fear failure isn't because of the failure part at all. It's actually because of something else. It's because of the negative emotion we've associated with failure, the emotional pain that we think that we'll experience. And it's often because of how we think others will view us, their negative assessments of us, their judgments, their criticism. It's going to ruin my reputation, or they're going to think I'm foolish. We experience failure as a form of rejection. And here's the thing, social judgment can be a really powerful motivator because it's felt as a form of social rejection. So it motivates us not to want to take action. In a very interesting pioneering study from 2003, headed by UCLA psychologist Matthew Lieberman, his team conducted a series of neuroimaging scans of people's brains. And the study found that the same brain regions that are activated by physical pain were also activated when people experience social rejection. This suggests that social rejection can be experienced as painful and can have a real impact on our emotions and our behavior. So in short, failure hurts. Even the thought of possible failure hurts. So when it comes to grit, we need to rise above and shift our perspective of failure. So what can we do? Well, here is where we can turn to insights from the world of research, practical, simple strategies to help prime ourselves to embody grit. We've trained these strategies with leaders and teams all around the world, so we can vouch that they do work. And to introduce the first strategy, I have a short story to illustrate it. St. Paul's Cathedral architect Christopher Wren once shared, "I came across 3 bricklayers hard at work. When I asked what they were doing, the first bricklayer responds, 'I'm working.' The second replies, 'I'm building a wall.' And the third says, 'I'm building a great cathedral to the Almighty.'" This short story is an illustration of the concept of grit. You see, it's not just about working hard, it's about working hard with a purpose. The first bricklayer is just going through the motions. He's not really thinking about why he's doing what he's doing. The second bricklayer, he has a little bit more drive. He's not just laying bricks, he's building a wall. But the third bricklayer, he's got that fire within. He's not just building a wall, he's building a cathedral to the Almighty. That's the kind of grit we're talking about here. It's about having a clear vision, a sense of purpose, and the determination to see things through no matter what comes your way. Which brings us to our first principle, identifying the meaning in what you do. Have you ever been working on a task and you stop and think to yourself, what's the point of this? It doesn't feel great in the moment. A lack of meaning is the easiest way to struggle on your journey, yet the reality is a lot of the workday will be filled with things that seemingly have no meaning. Identifying meaning in all of these is a core component of grit. So to hone your skills, because this is what we get asked, okay, great, that sounds fantastic, but how do we do it? Well, here is a really simple yet highly effective technique. It's called action identification, developed by researchers Valacher and Wegner. The premise is this. With any action, there is a higher and a lower level meaning. For example, right now, I'm speaking to a camera. That's the lower level meaning. But the higher level meaning would be, right now, I'm helping to raise your awareness to enhance your grit. So you want to always be thinking about the higher level meaning to what you're doing. The questions that you can ask are, what are you really here to do? How are you contributing to the bigger picture, and what impact are you having? For example, a low-level meaning of a work-related task could be, I'm preparing a report. Low-level meaning. The high-level meaning is, I'm contributing to a project launch that will change customers' lives. So this is just one example of how we describe things to ourselves. Because the thing is, how we describe things to ourselves has an impact on how we feel and whether we feel passion towards it and a desire to persist or give up. Now, this is a really great exercise not only for you individually, you can also do this with your team. In 2022, there was a newly formed HR leadership team in the health insurance industry, and they reached out to us for support. The company had just gone through a large-scale transformation, so this leadership team was new, and they were struggling to work together. Something was really off, and they wanted our assistance. After asking some questions, I really quickly discovered that one of the main reasons they were struggling stemmed from the fact that the team wasn't clear about how their role or the team fit into the new company strategy. So to start, we needed to gain clarity on the context using a funnel approach. So starting big, what's the organization's new direction? Funneling to the next level, how does HR fit into that strategy? And then how does their leadership team fit in? And when we workshopped this together with this team, it helped everyone on the team truly understand their team purpose and what the expectations were. And once everyone was on the same page, it changed how this team worked together. They had greater collective grit. So that was, of course, in the HR space, that was in the insurance industry. But it's really valuable in your industry too, to make sure everyone on the team knows the team's purpose and the purpose for everything that they do. You can encourage a discussion with your team using the 4-step context funnel. The first question is, what is our organization's purpose? What are we here to do? How does our department fit in? How does our team fit in? And finally, if you have a specific task or a project you're working on, how does this project or task fit in? When you do this collectively and do this together, it drives cohesiveness and it makes sure everyone is on the same page and understands how what they do fits in with the bigger picture. It helps people uncover why they matter. And by identifying meaning in what everyone does and connecting the dots, it can help to foster a greater level of collective grit. But of course, this is easier said than done. What we find is that many struggle when it comes to finding the meaning in what they do, whether that's individually or as a team. They don't know how to dig beneath the surface to identify that higher level meaning and what it really is. And you might have experienced this too, which highlights the importance of the second principle I'm going to share with you, which can help you and your team figure out what your higher purpose is. Now, we all know who this is. Steve Jobs, co-founder of Apple. He's known for his unwavering determination and grit in pursuing his passions and goals. But what many people may not realize is that Jobs was also deeply curious and always had a thirst for knowledge and exploration. He was known for his relentless pursuit of new ideas and always asking why and what if questions. This combination of grit and curiosity served Jobs extremely well throughout his career. He was able to persist through numerous setbacks and challenges, using his determination and drive to overcome obstacles and continue pursuing his vision. And at the same time, his curiosity and insatiable appetite for knowledge helped him to constantly seek out new ideas and innovate in ways that others couldn't. So this brings us to our second principle of grit. A hallmark of grit is becoming genuinely curious about what you're doing and why you're doing it, about how you're reacting to the situation or the experience. Curiosity brings with it a desire to act, to dive in and to explore, and then when things get tough, we're more likely to stick it out. So how do we develop curiosity? How do we develop a sense of curiosity for everything that we're doing? Well, the first step is to ask why 5 times. It's called the 5 whys, and it's a problem-solving technique that was first used in the Toyota production system. The idea is that you repeatedly ask why 5 times in order to get to the root cause of a problem, to drill down to the underlying cause rather than just addressing the symptoms, which is what happens all too often. And this technique is not only fantastic for problem solving, but also for asking yourself why you're doing something. Why are you doing it? When you drill down on why you're doing a specific task or working on a project, this is how you can uncover the higher level meaning within it. Now, let me give you an example to help provide a bit more context as to how you would use this. So let's say you're engaging in a work task and you have no meaning and you're struggling to identify the higher level meaning. The first why would be, okay, why are you doing this task at work? And you might respond with, well, it's part of my job. Why is this part of your job? Because it helps support the company's goal. And why is supporting the company's goal important? Well, it's to ensure the company's success and growth. Okay, why is that important? Well, it helps provide stability and security for employees and contribute to the development of the community. And why is that important? To make a positive impact on people's lives and help to create a better future for everyone. This final why, to have a positive impact and create a better future, this is that higher level meaning. And you can see how, just like the bricklayers, when you tap into this purpose, it's far more personally motivating. It's not always easy to do, but it's really powerful when you do it. So that's the first way to cultivate curiosity. The second way that you can cultivate curiosity is really simple. It's just asking why, what, how, and who questions. For example, why do I follow this process? What's causing me to underperform? How do I increase my energy? Who else could give me a different perspective? And a really valuable cognitive reframe is whenever you notice yourself thinking, why do I have to do this? Which you might experience at some point, instantly reframe to, what can I learn from this experience? This helps you maintain curiosity for what you're doing and what you can learn from every experience. And this is how you embody what's called a learner mindset, which is a highly valuable skill in business and in life. When you become curious about your work, your responses, your outcomes, your performance, your relationships, and how to improve, it becomes so much easier to seek the meaning in what you're doing, which is absolutely critical for grit. So the first principle was to identify meaning, and the second is to cultivate genuine curiosity. Okay, moving on. Who has children? Who has kids? When your baby was learning to walk, they would have fallen over a lot. Now, at what point did they stop and say to themselves, I fell over again, I'm no good at this, I'm going to stop trying? They never would have said that. That thought would never have crossed their minds, not only because they didn't have the language to communicate it, but because they didn't have a concept of failure. And they're instinctively driven to get back up and try again. They're innately driven to persist. They have a lot of innate grit. Somewhere along the way, we've forgotten our true nature, to get back up and persist. As adults, we allow the humiliation, the risk of rejection, the potential for criticism from others, or the shame that might come with failing to prevent us from even trying, or from learning from the experience. And earlier, we briefly explored how even the thought of failure can be painful. But it's important to remember that failure is normal and an inevitable part of the working process. It's how we learn and grow. It's how we find new and innovative ways to solve problems. Failure shouldn't be viewed as setback, but as an opportunity for growth and improvement. It's also important to remember that everyone fails, even the most successful people in the world. It's often how they got to be where they are. The difference between those who achieve their goals and those who don't is often their ability to learn from failure, to bounce forward and try again. So instead of calling it failure, let's call it learning. You don't win or lose, you win or learn. And here are two proven ways to change your perspective on failure so you can embrace it as learning. Instead of only tracking success, track the effort applied, even if something didn't work out. What does this actually mean? Well, a simple way to do this is through what's called a post-mortem analysis. This is really common in the project management world. What you do is you reflect on the project or whatever you were applying effort towards, and you identify what went well and what didn't, and then document what you learned. It's like a post-implementation review, if you've seen or heard of one of those. These insights help improve further projects and processes, and the act of reflecting helps to make the effort applied more meaningful by extracting valuable insights and knowledge from the experience. It can be written, it can be done through a team meeting, or even both. Two key questions to think about when conducting your own personal post-mortem are, what did the experience teach you? And how will it shape your decision-making, your thinking, and your actions going forward? This is how you give it meaning. Second, don't suffer in silence. Sharing experiences and insights from failure can help to improve processes, prevent mistakes from being repeated, and foster a culture of continuous improvement. Also, sharing experiences and learning from failure can lead to more productive and collaborative teams because individuals can support and learn from each other. So this third principle to develop grit is all about reframing failure as a growth opportunity. Remember, you don't win or fail, you win or learn. Okay, next up. We live in a world of hacks and quick fixes. You can quite literally search on Google to find out how to publish a book, start a business, build a house, establish a nonprofit in Micronesia. The information is out there, literally at your fingertips. Yet so many people, they don't take action. So we've experienced this. All of us have at some point. We know something intellectually, but we don't do it. We don't implement, we don't apply the knowledge. And this is called the knowing-doing gap, coined by Jeffrey Pfeffer and Robert Sutton. In this information overloaded world that we live in, there's almost a seductive quality associated with learning, absorbing, consuming information. Each time you do, you get that beautiful, rewarding dopamine hit. It feels great, doesn't it? But then we get stuck in analysis paralysis, overload. So it's easier to keep consuming than it is to actually take action. But the reality is that cultivating grit and building our internal resilience to bounce forward when we're faced with failure or setback, it requires action. We must do. But it's not just about getting in and doing. We have to be doing the right things. It's also not about prioritizing speed. It's not just doing so we can finish and move on. It's about doing so we can learn and grow. This is the key. So instead of focusing on speed or the end result, focus on emphasizing your growth. Fall in love with the process of achieving your goals, persisting in the face of obstacles. This is really important, not as an individual, but also for organizations. There is far too much focus on targets and achieving growth goals. When you actually shift focus to the journey, people are going to feel more engaged and perform better in the long run. So focus on growth. Now, this sounds great in theory, right? I think everyone's on board with this. So we all support the idea because it makes logical sense. But how do we put it into practice? Well, a fantastic way to do this is to set a growth goal that focuses on behaviors and qualities that you want to develop and healthy habits you want to form. So instead of a destination, like getting a new job, making more money, exceeding your targets, writing a book, what I encourage you to do instead is emphasize the experience over the end results. Prioritize the growth and acknowledge that it's a continual journey, it's a continual process. You might prioritize developing your grit and persistence, working on your patience, or becoming more supportive of other people's successes. This continually reminds you about how developing your character, your qualities, and your personal attributes are important to enable you to demonstrate a growth mindset and grit over the long term, which ultimately benefits your organizations. So this fourth principle of grit is to focus on growth over speed. We slow down and we shift our attention away from the destination or the end result and start to deeply enjoy the process and the growth we experience through every challenge, obstacle, and hurdle. Okay, 4 down, 2 to go. Okay, has anyone ever trained for a marathon? Anybody? Well, if I were training for a marathon and I expected myself to run the full distance on my first day of training, I would probably give up. Why? Because I would very quickly realize that I couldn't run the full distance. I'm not even remotely close to it. Now, anyone who has trained for anything before knows that you need to start small, with achievable goals at first to build momentum and endurance. And the same principle applies to our goals and especially to developing our grit. Now, here is what typically happens. If we were to map time and results in a plot, we generally expect that when we're working on something, we will incrementally improve bit by bit. Right? So over time and with practice, we will get incrementally better day by day. This orange line is what we think that progression will look like, a straight line of improvement. But that's not what typically happens in reality. It's what James Clear, author of Atomic Habits, calls the plateau of latent potential. As Clear emphasizes, gains accumulate. So if you get just 1% better each day for 1 year, you will be 37 times better by the end of the year. 37 times better. So what actually is happening is your path will look more like this, exponential growth, and it's called the 1% rule. The message is this: small improvements don't feel like they're making much of a difference at the time, but they do add up. It's a form of accumulative advantage. So if you want to develop your grit, remind yourself that persistence pays off. Committing to just a 1% improvement to your habits or behaviors is absolutely doable, and it does pay off. So this is the fifth principle of grit. Commit to continuous improvement. And now we move to the final principle of grit. But first, we all remember Kodak. Or we may not, but Kodak was a dominant player in the photography industry. But as digital photography began to gain popularity, this company struggled to keep up with the changes in technology. Now here's something many people don't know about Kodak. The world's first digital camera was invented in 1975. And do you know by who? By Steve Sasson, who was an electrical engineer who worked at Kodak. He worked for this very company. When he excitedly shared this new technology with management, this was their reaction. That's cute, but don't tell anyone about it. Then, 6 years later, in 1981, Sony had just introduced its first electric camera, and Kodak conducted a study to understand the likely adoption curve with electronic and digital camera technology. They wanted to understand what's happening here, what's the market going to look like. And the results of the study produced both good and bad news. The bad news was, for them, that digital photography had the potential capability to replace Kodak's established film-based business. The good news was that it would take roughly 10 years for that to happen, so Kodak had time to prepare. Did Kodak prepare? No, they did not. They continued to invest in traditional film technology and resisted the shift to digital. They failed to realize that the market was changing and that their business model was becoming obsolete. And they eventually filed for bankruptcy in 2012. Now, one could argue that Kodak had a lot of grit. They were persistent, determined, committed. But that was the very reason for their ultimate downfall, which highlights what? It highlights that grit is also about knowing when to quit and when to pivot to new opportunities in order to remain successful. So what does this mean for us? Well, we can take insights from this and apply it to our own journeys. As with any goal on the journey, it's really important to keep track of what works and what doesn't. Otherwise, you could be spending all of your time on the things that aren't working, seeing no progress and feeling demotivated as a result. So this one isn't about tracking progress, but tracking the result of each action that you take. In the same way, as you're working on your goals, track the outcomes each day. For example, let's say you need to convert cold calls into leads. You might track how many calls you make each day and how many are converting, based on the script that you're using, the result, the outcome. Now, the following week, you might try a different script and then compare the results and the outcomes. You might want to track the effectiveness of the techniques that you're using, which also then allows you to pivot to a different technique when needed. In the same way that Kodak persevered with something that they knew would become obsolete, there is no point persevering with a technique that you know doesn't work. Try something new. This way you make sure that you're not persevering in the wrong direction. So this final component of our framework to develop grit in our lives and our careers is to document your results and pivot if needed. These 6 principles will help you develop your grit to bounce forward no matter what comes your way. It's through putting these into practice that you'll be able to maintain persistence for the long term. Dale Lee, professor of neuroscience at Yale, he said, "We only learn when there is uncertainty." And that is a good thing. His research published in Neuron found that there is greater neural activity in the prefrontal cortex when we're faced with uncertainty. And it's in these environments that our brain is primed for learning. So what does this mean for us? Well, while we don't necessarily like change or uncertainty, these are situations when we can learn the most about ourselves and our hidden potential. So the key message here, and what I'm going to end with, is that when it comes to grit, you want to reframe your relationship with uncertainty to see it as opportunity to learn and discover rather than a threat. And then use this as fuel to propel you forward. It will help you regulate your state, improve your performance, and even make you an inspiration to your team during challenging times. And that's how you can persist for the long term and thrive, both personally and professionally. Now, I hope you enjoyed our session on developing your grit, and you now have a number of techniques and tools that you can apply immediately to increase your mental toughness. Remember, developing grit will serve you so well, and putting it into practice is what's going to help you, your team, and your organizations to thrive. As Angela Duckworth says, grit is living life like it's a marathon, not a sprint. And I wish you and your organization all the very best on your marathon.
Thank you, Shadé. That was awesome. The part that resonated with me was recognizing your purpose and vision, and then applying intent really does cultivate success, and I think helps to keep you on track when things don't go your way and you need that grit to push through. I know I got some really powerful takeaways from that, so hopefully our audience did too. Now, we have had a few questions come through from the listeners. The first one definitely resonates with me. So we've faced huge disruption over the last few years. From your interaction with other organizations and individuals, what's your take on the current sentiment and the amount of grit in the business community? Are there any risks we need to be looking out for?
Yeah, this is a good question. So there does appear to be a mixed sentiment around grit. So on the one hand, many companies are displaying a remarkable amount of resilience, determination, and adaptability in the face of disruption. They have higher collective levels of grit. Both the organizations and the people within them are showing a real willingness to embrace change, to pivot their business models, pivot the way they do things, and develop innovative solutions to really stay ahead of the curve. Then on the other hand, there are some companies that are really struggling to keep up, which puts them at risk of falling behind. Because as we know, when we're faced with intense disruption and change, it can be a lot for the people within those companies. Now, though, what we're seeing is this real ubiquitous sense in the business community that grit, resilience, and adaptability are critical success factors for today. One of the risks, though, to keep an eye out for is resistance to change. Because often resistance to change is a symptom of people not feeling that they have the resources and the support that they need to cope. Because, to have grit, it requires us to feel like we have what we need to persist. So if people are starting to resist change, it's often symptomatic of deeper issues that the organization actually needs to address. But there's definitely this awareness or this universal acknowledgement that grit is becoming crucial for success of organizations.
Thank you. Okay, so next up, if you're working in a team, naturally everyone has varying levels of grit, which I guess can be circumstantial depending on what's going on. If you happen to be one of those team members with higher levels of grit, how do you support or help those who are maybe struggling with having that level of resilience?
Oh, I love this question. I really enjoy when people are thinking about how they can help others. So the practices that I've shared during our session today, they can all be extended and applied to your teams too. You can actually help your team identify meaning, and in your next meeting, you can invite them to work through that context funnel I took you through. What's our organization's purpose? How does our department contribute? How does our team contribute? How does this project contribute? This actually helps to align everyone, which is always fantastic when it comes to gaining team cohesion. Another thing you can do is openly share about a failure that you experienced, but importantly, what you learned. Because this gives others permission to do the same, and it reminds everyone that the focus should be on growth. You can also encourage them to document and track their results, and then share with the team how effective the approach is, or if they're thinking of pivoting. Mostly though, when we think about human behavior, when we are struggling, if we look around and everyone else has their head up, they're optimistic and they're focused, then we're quicker to get our heads back up too. We feed off the energy of other people, especially in a team. So when it comes to grit, one of the most powerful things you can do is also the most simplest, and it's actually to role model grit for others to see, because this starts to spread positive ripples of impact, and it's something that we can all do.
Great, thank you. I think I'm just adding to that as well, just creating a safe space where people have that, there's that psychological safety and they feel like they can open up to their teammates and maybe share when they are struggling with it.
Oh, you're so right there. Psychological safety is so fundamentally important, especially during these times of disruption and change where people are feeling it. People need to feel like they can raise the issue when they're challenged by something, or genuinely seek support. Not only that, actually just speak up if something doesn't feel right to them. So creating that by, again, role modeling what you're wanting others to do and see, and then sharing vulnerabilities, sharing failures. This is how we create these beautiful cultures that are characterized by psychological safety. So I'm so glad you mentioned that one, Emma.
And this next one is definitely something I think we all struggled with through the pandemic in the last couple of years. So if you're exercising grit all of the time, can you get fatigued? And do you have any suggestions for how to recover when this happens?
Oh, yes, it is definitely possible to experience grit fatigue. when we persist in a difficult or challenging situation for an extended period of time, we're not an infinite resource, so we get sapped of energy. Just like a phone battery. The battery starts to deplete and then we need to recharge it, otherwise we're at risk of complete exhaustion or burnout. And just like our bodies need rest and recovery after we work out at the gym, our minds actually do need time to recharge after sustained mental effort. And our emotional energy can easily become depleted if we're not looking out for it. So I like to talk about it from the perspective of emotion hygiene. There are certain foundations that we need to perform at our best. The first is one that I think we all intuitively know. It's like the knowing-doing gap. We know this, we don't do it. Sleep. Make sure you're getting enough sleep. Studies show that the lack of sleep reduces grit, which then leads to poorer performance. So that's a prerequisite. We need to be getting enough sleep, but it's not only duration, it's actually quality of sleep as well. Second, make time for exercise. We know that those with more grit generally engage in more regular physical activity, which helps improve their physical health, but also primes psychological resilience. And then third, focus on regulating your emotions. Practice stress relievers, including deep breathing, especially when you're facing a particularly stressful time at work. A really simple one that I like to share is box breathing. You might have heard of it. You simply breathe in, so you inhale for 4 seconds, you hold for 4 seconds, exhale for 4, and then hold for 4. And you can just repeat this as a way to ground you. You focus on your counts. It also prevents, or rather creates, some emotional distance between the source of the stress and your state. And now finally, and this links back to what we were talking about, Emma, with psychological safety, I really encourage you that if you're experiencing fatigue, brain fog, struggling to focus, having challenges with productivity, it's always worthwhile raising it and seeking support. Because if you don't raise it, your performance will continue to suffer. You will continue to suffer, which doesn't help your organization, and it certainly doesn't help you. But these are definitely principles we can keep in mind. Grit fatigue is a real thing, so we need to be kind to ourselves and kind to the people around us.
Thanks, Shadé. I know I'm guilty of the knowing-doing gap.
I think we all are.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much. That's all we have time for today. So we'll have to wrap it up there. We hope you all enjoyed Shadé's presentation. Please take some time to answer the survey and some questions, and keep watching for a quick overview of how SAP Concur's solution can help automate your expense process and give you more visibility into company spending. Thanks again, Shadé, and thanks to all of our listeners. Have a good day.
Thank you so much. It's been such a delight to be here.